Irene Part 2. Although mainly raised apart from Max and Irene, Snooky, as little Mabel came to be known, was loved by two sets of parents and had two loving homes. The home of Max and Irene continued to grow. There came 3 more babies, making 6 girls in a row. Alice was a little brown girl, independent and bold, yet she was generally obedient and usually did as was told. She would start the next 2 generations, the first grandchild, Martin Edwin Sayuli Elkonis, and the first great-grandchild, Ridge Hannemann Elkonis. More children are always a blessed bonus. After Alice came blondish Marion, with fine features and fair skin. She came out kicking like a rebel and would become the family historian. Talented with music, her voice is rich and strong. She would travel extensively with a heart full of song. Green-eyed Victoria was contemplative and sweet. Her depth and strong will were not obvious, but discreet. She would live in Canada for 14 years, where she'd build a company from scratch. She would inspire and help many, certainly being worthy of a potlatch. Aside from a family, Max desired opportunity and adventure too. So, the family moved from Pongo to hopping Honolulu. Refrigeration and air conditioning is how his money he made. He was the first Polynesian to learn this trade. A sailor, a civil servant, and a bouncer. 3 means to raise his clan. In between jobs, his daughters massaged his legs, feet, arms, and hands. Back in Samoa, Snooky missed her sisters. She felt without them she'd surely die. So Mother Mabel sent her to a boarding school where the family of girls was nearby. From that school, Snooky often did run. She wanted to stay with Max and Irene. Her upbringing gave her many life skills. She is now a lady, independent and serene. Irene's mother, who was really her aunt, loved to take the girls to the cinema. To this day, the family still enjoys movies, thanks to a grandmother known as Ma. What's that cheerful chattering in the background? It can be heard clear and plain. Why, it's vivacious Lyda, aka Baby Jane. When Lyda was about 5 years old, she stopped Max from taking another alcoholic drink. And just how did she do that, you ask? She simply poured all his liquor down the sink. 7 darling daughters. This next one can't possibly be another. Enter mischievous green-eyed Irene, named after her beautiful mother. A determined soul in a small package. Little Irene was a cheerleader at Kahuku High. There's nothing this girl can't do, from conquering a tumor to assuring the best buy. Now imagine being 8 times pregnant and each time having a girl. Well, Max and Irene wanted a boy, so they gave it another whirl. Number 9, however, was full-cheeked baby Joyce. You know, 9 kids would make most nervous, but this child was relatively easy because she came full of service. Although hip and cool when in school, Joyce helped raise Rosie's children and Alice's too. She was a catering sister to her younger siblings. For her parents, there was nothing she wouldn't do. Well, still the home had not one boy. Time for a blessing from Matthew Cowley. Lo and behold, a son was born, and he looked like a pure Howley. White skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. Max Jr. added light from the start. He joked, smiled, and teased, but always had love in his heart. Well, maybe their luck was changing. Another son would make them glad. You know, hope is known to work miracles, so they hoped for another lad. But first it was time for another move. Redondo Beach, California was the next stop. A small 2-bedroom home was cozy. For 9 girls, 1 boy, a mom, and a pop. The family of 12 had settled nicely. Yet, more would live in that house near sand and water. Like Max's mom, 3 nephews and 2 brothers. Oh, and Max's sister with her daughter. Obviously the house was cramped. The neighbors must have been quite impressed. So a new house in Torrance Max bought and gave the other to his mom and the rest. They say variety is the spice of life. Max and Irene already had a Tama Palangi. What they needed was a Tama Samoa. And with Arthur, they couldn't go wrongy. Dark hair, dark eyes, dark skin, a true lover of surf and sea. He'd be the only son to continue the Max and Irene Hannemann name progeny. With these boys came lots of naughty. The girls had been a piece of cake. Max was stern and instilled discipline, which was not always easy to take. Retired and suffering with heart trouble, Max kept busy in various ways. Temple worker, court translator, Samoan organization leader, and high councilman with a family to raise. What Max needed was a personal secretary and someone to organize his pills. Irene was busy caring for children and home, so child number 12 would fit the bill. Patricia was named after Irene's sister, who was a habited Catholic nun. But Patricia was a dancer who traveled the world and always remembered the birthdays of everyone. Well, now they had an even dozen, 10 girls and 2 boys. But they believed the more the merrier. After all, man is that he might have joy. Lloyd was an Aries like his mother. Vegetarian meals and health cookies for him she'd make. He'd be a sheriff's deputy, Air Force sergeant, and diplomat. But at home, he'd always be pancake. 3.5 years later came the apple of her father's eye. The Queen of Yosepa Street was born. Mauricia was anything but shy. She could dance wildly at parties, talk to a stranger like an old friend. Rosie was the perfect beginning, and Mauricia was the perfect end. 14 children in all. Oh my goodness gracious. How did Max and Irene do it? They were faithful and tenacious. They were also kind and considerate. Their generosity was well known. Relatives and friends alike came often to stay in their home. To help raise such a large family, Rosie and Eleanor were only too glad to work as tellers at the local banks, then give their entire paychecks to Dad. These 2 oldest sisters wanted to serve missions, but the family couldn't afford it monetarily, so Rosie told Eleanor, "You go first, and I'll stay behind momentarily." Rosie continued to work to help support Eleanor serving across the ocean. After 2 years, the roles were reversed. These 2 girls set the example of devotion. Through the years, many changes occurred. Marriages, births, and challenges of life. In 1973, on a cold April night, Max departed from his children and wife. They had just finished family home evening when Max's heart began to ache upon kissing 11-year-old Mauricia goodbye. To the hospital Max they did take. After 38 years of marriage, the love of her life was no longer there. Irene had bills to pay and 4 kids at home who were still dependent on her care. She couldn't drive and had never written a check. Remember, her education only went to 3rd grade. Max's Pongo girl was living in Los Angeles County. We'd now see of what she was made. Never once was she depressed. She couldn't understand what that meant. However, she understood God, from whom she said all blessings were sent. With God by her side, she took all in stride. She was wise beyond mortal comprehension. She managed quite wonderfully with money to spare while living on Max's good pension. If a child disappointed her, she would resist strife. She believed the concept of free choice. She'd confidently say, "That's his or her life," and offer counsel with a stern but warm voice. Irene was admired and loved by so many that on her 70th birthday she was given an honorary PhD from USC, but her real reward was attaining heaven. For a woman who never sought recognition, it was truly amazing to see. Her funeral procession had cars for miles. They paid tribute to her spiritual nobility. The grandchildren who knew her in real life hold fond memories of Grandma in heart. She is the queen of queens of motherhood who had the most humble start. Of all the titles that can be granted, there's one that's like no other. that exceeds politics, fame, wealth, and royalty. It's the cherished title of my mother.